Israel's war on Gaza has killed at least 41,500 Palestinians and wounded at least 96,000, according to the latest figures released on Thursday by the health ministry there. More than half of the dead have been women and children, including about 1,300 babies and toddlers under the age of 2. Israeli forces have repeatedly struck schools, alleging Hamas uses them as command centres to plan attacks. The Palestinian group has denied the charges. Well, my next guest has been a vocal advocate for humanitarian issues, in particular the ongoing crisis in Gaza. As the first Muslim leader of a Western government, Humza Yousaf's personal connection to the region runs deep, with his in-laws previously trapped in Gaza giving him a unique and heartfelt perspective on the conflict. Humza Yousaf, thank you, sir, for your time. Let's begin with the issue at hand, Gaza, because you are deeply connected to this story through your wife, of course, and her family. And I want to begin by asking, how are they?
Well, that's very kind of you to ask. Most of my wife's family have managed to leave Gaza, but unfortunately not all of them. And her cousin, Sally, her 4 children, and her husband, we haven't heard from for, I think, now 5 days. They were in Derbala. Derbala was told to evacuate to a safe zone near Al-Mawasi, and of course there is no such thing as a safe zone in Gaza. We know that from the atrocities that have been committed by the Israeli government thus far. And I'm afraid we don't know where Sally, her 4 children, and her husband are. We pray for their safety. But this is just one story. Of course, there are millions of people and therefore millions of families across the world worried about their loved ones in Gaza. And I think even if you don't have a human connection in the way that I do, and a family connection in the way that my wife and I do, then still people are rightly angered, upset at the scale of the atrocity that we see the people of Gaza are suffering from.
Now, you've clearly used your platform as a major working politician and as the former First Minister of Scotland over previous months to talk about Gaza, to talk about what is happening there for Palestinian people. But you've also come under criticism from some saying, in their opinion, that you're failing to be, you're too partisan because you're too closely connected to the issue. What is your response to that?
Well, my response is pretty simple, that it's really clear that this is an issue of international law. You don't have to be pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, you just have to be pro-international law. To say that unequivocally, as I did, that there was no justification for the terrible crimes that were committed on October the 7th, and at the same time, nothing, of course, can justify killing innocent Gazans, innocent children, innocent men and innocent women, collectively punishing them. 40,000, we know now, Gazans have been killed, not died, have been killed by the Israeli government. So I'm a believer in the equitable and equal application of international law. And that must apply, of course, to state parties and non-state parties equally. And we have, with Israel, a Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, where there is an arrest warrant from the ICC being sought. So therefore, in my opinion, we should be treating those who are breaching international law in an equal manner, whether they are a terrorist organisation or whether they are the head of a government.
Look, I'm glad you brought up the ICC because there are reports that your wife's family is preparing evidence from their time spent trapped in Gaza to present to the ICC. Is that still going ahead, and what outcome do you hope for?
Yes, I mean, the ICC themselves, the prosecutors involved, have been asking those with eyewitness testimony to come forward. And just to give you an example of some of the eyewitness testimony from my mother-in-law, they were in their house in Derbala in Gaza. This was in late October, and the blast occurred. And when the dust literally settled on that blast, they went outside, and there was an 8-year-old girl lying in their front garden who had broken her spine. She had been lifted in the air many metres high and landed in their front garden with, as I say, a broken spine, completely paralysed. That's just one example of the many things that my mother-in-law and father-in-law saw, and therefore it's right that we compile that testimony, collate it, and present it to the International Criminal Court. And it is for the International Criminal Court, the judges, to decide whether an arrest warrant should be granted or not. But I hope every single person, as I say, state or non-state party, that commits egregious breaches of international law must be held to account. Otherwise, international law is completely and utterly meaningless.
How much hope do you have for that international law, the process being followed through then, and Netanyahu being held to account for those crimes that you're talking about?
Look, I have to believe, and I can understand why people don't believe that international law is applied equally. Let's be frank here. It seems from the international community's response to Gaza that Palestinian lives are cheaper, that Palestinian blood is cheap. That is the view from many people, not just Muslims, not just those in the East, but many people believe that to be the case, given how we deal with, for example, egregious breaches of international law in Ukraine, and I fully support the people in the government of Ukraine, versus how we deal with egregious breaches of international law in Gaza. There is a double standard, a hypocrisy, which is very evident for many people to see. So international law has to mean something, and therefore, if there is an ICC arrest warrant granted by the judges of the International Criminal Court, then it must be upheld. That means if the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, does land in UK soil, then it's important that he is immediately arrested.
Now, look, in terms of the way forward from here, and I know it's early for some to even begin thinking of that, but certainly among countries and governments in the Middle East, there's been more activity in recent weeks and months to try and find some sort of sustainable solution between Israel and Palestine. What to you does sustainable coexistence look like?
Well, it's a good question. So there is the immediate, and in the immediate, there must, of course, be a ceasefire. We need that ceasefire so that, of course, the remaining hostages are released, and, of course, then the humanitarian aid gets completed and unfettered access into Gaza, and the violence and the massacre and the killing of innocent Gazan people stops immediately. So that's why, in the immediate term, we need that ceasefire. In the more longer term, in terms of a sustainable future, I want to see a two-state solution. I'm a believer in the two-state solution, a viable, safe, secure Palestinian state alongside a safe, secure Israel. That is what the two-state solution must deliver. But the hypocrisy from many governments, including, I'm afraid, the United Kingdom government, is that they recognise one state, so they recognise the state of Israel, but they refuse to recognise the state of Palestine. That's unjustifiable. That is hypocritical. And that, to me, does not show somebody who's honest, or a government that's honest, about trying to find a long-term sustainable solution. So if you believe in a two-state solution, if you believe in peace in that region, then you must immediately recognise the state of Palestine, as Ireland, Norway and Spain have done so recently.
The two words keep cropping up in our conversation, one being hypocrisy and the other being hope. Hypocrisy, in your mind, seems to be winning out a little bit in terms of the way things are sorted out. But what about hope then? Do you think there is any hope for that two-state solution within the next few years?
I do. I actually think this is probably a critical turning point. I think many people across the world, many who understandably did not know much about the terrible atrocities happening under occupation for the people of Palestine, have now woken up. They've seen the horrific images that we've all witnessed over the last 10 months. So I do think this is a critical juncture. I think this is a turning point. And I think there is inevitability about the recognition, global recognition of the Palestinian state, but it has to be immediate. The world has promised now for many decades that there will be an equal Palestinian state coexisting alongside the state of Israel. They have turned their back on that promise for far too many decades, but I believe it's now only a matter of time until there is that global recognition of the Palestinian state. And I'm talking to you, of course, from Scotland in the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom government must stop wasting any more time and must immediately recognise the state of Palestine. To do otherwise, as I say, is hypocrisy, or paying lip service, and merely lip service, to your support of a two-state solution.
What do you make of the UK government's policy towards this conflict so far? Of course, we had a change of government in the UK over the summer, but do you think they're making the right decisions when it comes to this conflict? So
the previous Conservative government was, I'm afraid, complicit in my mind, because not only did they give almost unequivocal backing to the government of Israel, regardless of what atrocities were committed, but of course the UK government was sending arms and continues to send arms to Israel. So when it comes to the current United Kingdom government, the new government, the Labour government that is now in charge, there have been some stronger statements in regards to the situation in Gaza, but there's two issues that remain unresolved. One is the UK government continues to sell arms. There has to be a complete ban, a complete suspension of arms sales to Israel. There's talk of a partial suspension. There must be a complete suspension of arms sales to Israel. And the second issue, as we've already discussed, must be the immediate recognition of the state of Palestine. There's no need to wait for some mythical process that might exist in the future. If you already recognise the state of Israel, you must complete the other side of the equation and recognise the state of Palestine, as our neighbours in Ireland have done, our neighbours in Spain, our neighbours in Norway have done.
It is something to note exactly that those countries surrounding the UK have made that decision. The UK still holding out. Look, UK not the only one having an election in this historic election year. The US, of course, holding an election in November. We don't know, of course, who's going to be in the White House. Could it be Harris? Could it be Trump? But what do you think that could mean for the situation in Gaza?
Well, again, I think it's actually the American people that will drive forward change in the United States. I was heartwarmed, I have to say, to see many months ago now, when American Jews were the ones who occupied Central Station in New York demanding a ceasefire. It was the American Jewish community that occupied Congress and demanded a ceasefire. So it is the people of the United States who undoubtedly will be the conscience for their government. They will be the ones who I hope will drive that change. And the United States, of course, one of, if not arguably the most powerful geopolitical player in the globe. I think it's really important that they uphold international law. When we saw the interventions from the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, I was aghast when they had members of Congress threatening to sanction the International Criminal Court. Look, the international law has to mean something, and therefore it has to be applied equally and equitably. We can't pick and choose who international law applies to and who it doesn't apply to. So I would urge whoever is the next president of the United States, and that will clearly be a matter for the American people, to make sure that when it comes to its geopolitical stance, that it's driven by humanity, by compassion, and by the upholding of international law.
Now, you already mentioned Ukraine as part of the discussion, and you have said recently you want support for Ukraine to remain steadfast from the United Kingdom, I'm assuming, but also from the US, from the Western Allied forces. But what do you make then of Ukraine's recent push into Russia? How has this changed things?
Well, for me, there is a Russian war of aggression that has been waged against the people and the government of Ukraine. And for me, the situation is pretty simple. The people of Ukraine are also fighting for Europe's freedom and for our freedom. I've met many Ukrainian families here in Scotland forced to leave their home due to that war of aggression from the Russians. And of course, the Ukrainians have every right to defend themselves and to fight back. Let's make no mistake about it, it is Vladimir Putin that has waged this war of aggression, as he did, of course, many years ago when annexing Crimea. So I make no apology about my stances at all. I always look at these issues through the lens of international law, as I've said to you already, and there's no justification, none, for Vladimir Putin waging this war of aggression. So we need Vladimir Putin to be held to account for that, for the annexation of land and for the war that he's waged in Ukraine.
Indeed, Mr. Yousaf, you've made no apologies throughout your career, in fact, for voicing your strong policy positions, your opinions, not only within the government, but also on social media. So I hope that while we've got you for this discussion, you don't mind us touching on this topic, because it brought you to even bigger acclaim recently when you ended up in this online spat with the world's richest man, tech billionaire Elon Musk, who branded you, and I know you're aware of this, a super racist in his words, quote, and that you loathe white people. You in response called him a dangerous race baiter. Did you ever think you'd end up in that position?
Well, actually, it's not the first time I've challenged wealthy billionaires, and I'll make it very clear to Elon Musk that his billions will never buy me off. He'll never be able to silence me, and for calling out what his support for white supremacy. And that had devastating consequences here in the United Kingdom. Let's rewind back a few weeks when that tragic killing in Southport took place. It was a tragic killing of three beautiful souls that took place, and immediately in the aftermath of that devastating attack, there was disinformation and misinformation being spread that the individual involved was a Muslim, was a migrant. Of course, it turned out neither of those things was true. But that disinformation was amplified, not just in social media, but the disinformation amplified in the days after that by Elon Musk himself. Now, he is, in my view, a sympathiser of not just the far right, but of white supremacy. And if he thinks with his billions he can get me to be quiet or he can shut me up, he can think again.
Well, he did, in fact, say these words to his some nearly 200 million followers. Did that make you consider legal recourse, some kind of official reprimand? Would you do that?
Well, look, there's always the legal avenue that's open to us, but I've always said, from my perspective, I'm happy to debate and challenge Elon Musk. Perhaps you can moderate that debate. I'm more than happy to debate him anytime, any place, anywhere. Like him, I believe in free speech, but free speech is not absolute. It has its limits, and you cannot incite violence in the way that Elon Musk has and not expect there to be any consequences. And let's be frank about it, and research has been done into this since Elon Musk took over Twitter, now of course X. It has had a proliferation of right-wing, far-right accounts unleashed upon it, and that has, as I say, very dangerous consequences indeed.
And that, of course, has been an even bigger topic with the recent arrest of Pavel Durov, the head of Telegram in France, and, you know, European governments trying to work out their approach to law and free speech as well. So do you think governments should have a role in regulating social media?
They must. They absolutely must. Look, I'm an advocate of free speech, but free speech is, as I say, not absolute. We cannot go into a packed theatre and shout fire, and therefore the panic that ensues thereafter, people could get killed. Nobody advocates for absolute no limits whatsoever on free speech. There must be an element of regulation on social media, and my challenge to the United Kingdom government is that they must take firmer steps to punish those who incite violence and racism on social media platforms. And by the way, I get it every single day, frankly. I get abusive messages, racist messages, Islamophobic messages, death threats towards me and my family on various social media platforms, but primarily on X. So there has to be some level of regulation. The current levels are simply not good enough.
Now let's just finish up by talking about leaving, or whether you remain in that fight, because you've talked in the past about potentially leaving the United Kingdom. Is that true? Is that something that you would consider?
Look, I don't want to leave Scotland. Scotland is my home. I was born here, raised here, raising my beautiful three girls here. I wouldn't want to leave Scotland, but the truth of the matter is, particularly since the race riots that took place in the United Kingdom, and there wasn't any in Scotland, but the ones that took place across other parts of the United Kingdom, has meant that every single Muslim that I know and that I've spoken to, and this applies to me, is wondering, will my children be safe here in the future? My children are beautiful mixed-race children of Scottish, Palestinian, Pakistani heritage. Can I say truthfully that in the future they're going about their business, walking the streets, going to a friend's house, going to the mosque, for example, that they will be safe from attack or from reprisal? I can't truthfully say that with any certainty, and that's why so many of us, in fact every single Muslim I think, is virtually questioning whether or not they have a safe future here in the United Kingdom or not.
And it's a hard thing to draw parallels between feelings of safety or the reality of safety in the real world and that of online. But there is some sort of parallel to be drawn with remaining or leaving X, formerly Twitter, as well, because you've ended up in a situation, you say you receive abuse daily. Plenty of politicians in the UK have considered or have indeed left X in recent weeks and months, organisations, journalists, because they feel they can't responsibly be there anymore. Again, do you think it's more responsible to leave or to remain and try and change things?
Look, I can see the arguments both ways, I have to say, but look, I was on X for many, many years before Elon Musk took it over when it was Twitter. Don't get me wrong, I think it's always had some significant challenges with those who harass and abuse people. But I frankly think Elon Musk should be the one that should leave it, given that he's turned it into an absolute vile cesspit. And at the same time, if everybody who leaves it that is progressive, that is making the argument for common humanity, then of course it's just left to those who will peddle far-right conspiracy theories and white supremacy, and I don't think that's a very healthy platform. So I can completely understand the argument, but look, I'll stay on X and I'll keep challenging Elon Musk. As I say, his billions definitely can't force me off that platform and can't shut me up.
So for now, we'll continue to see you there on X, and we'll continue to see you there in Scotland and in the UK. Look, Humza Yousaf, it's been a pleasure speaking. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.